Just looking in the... So this event is hosted by the National Parliamentary Debate League, and so we're really happy for you to join us. Coach Breyer is our league president. I'm Miss Uka. I teach at New Road School, which is in Santa Monica, California. So we're kind of covering both coasts up and down tonight. And I am the outreach director for the National Parliamentary Debate League. And what this event is, it's a series that we've started this month and that we're excited to continue throughout the competitive season once it begins, called Outside the Round. And the goal of the series is to gather debaters like yourself in a space where we're not trying to debate, we're not trying to win a round. The goal is to learn and to discuss, because as you all will discover as you get into the even more competitive spaces, it's really easy to focus on the win and the loss of debate and to lose what the actual goal is for so many of us debate educators, which is to help you all train to be advocates. And so that's why our goal is to bring a variety of speakers who have different issues that are at the core of who they are, that inspires their life work, and to introduce you to these folks, let you know what they do and what they're motivated by, give you an opportunity to ask questions, and for us to all to get to know each other outside of the round, right? Hence the name. So what I'll do, I know some of you might have read Miss Adorian's bio, which is why you're here tonight, but I do want to read it just for anyone who didn't have a chance. So impressive. Adorian, I forgot how young you were. I was talking to someone and I said, oh, I think she's, and then I realized I added a few years because you've accomplished so much in such a short period of time that I just could not believe you are how old you are. I won't say the number, but I'll read the bio.
Cool.
So, Miss Adorian Murray Thomas is the founder and CEO of She Wins, Inc., a leadership and social action organization for middle and high school girls in her hometown of Newark, New Jersey. Adorian founded She Wins to serve young women who share her story of losing a loved one to gun violence. And today, the organization has served more than 500 girls in the greater Newark area. Adorian has been recognized as a President Obama White House Champion of Change, Glamour Magazine College Woman of the Year, a Young Futurist in the Root Magazine, and was featured in Essence's Black Girl Magic docuseries. Adorian recently made history where at the age of 23, and this is where I realized I added years that were not there, Adorian, where at the age of 23 years old, she became the youngest woman ever elected to the Board of Education in New Jersey's largest school district, Newark. Adorian previously served as the Newark Opportunity Youth Network, where she connected overaged and undercredited high school students to alternative educational options. So thinking about students who might be 19, 20, 21 years old, but still haven't finished their getting their diploma, and helped manage Newark's public schools restorative justice program. Adorian is a 2016 graduate of Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, and she holds a bachelor in political science and educational studies. So folks, I mean, we're such an intimate group. I'm really excited for everyone to be able to dig in and ask all of the questions that they want. The way we'll start is I'll ask Adorian a series of questions. If you would like to interrupt with a question, feel free to raise your hand, put it in the chat box. You can chat it to me individually or to the entire group, or we'll just, be able to raise your hand and ask questions that way. So Adorian, my first question is, you occupy the nonprofit space as well as the space of politics. You are in these two different spaces, but I know that there's a single issue that drives all of your work. There's a connection in all of the things that you choose to do. What is the social issue that's closest to your heart?
Yeah, well, I have to say first, a lot of my story really starts when I was in you guys' seats, right? 7th, 8th, 9th graders, just being young and having questions about how the world worked, and why it worked the way it worked. And I specifically remember like most of those questions coming up in two places: in the back of my mom's car and in the back of her classroom. Right, like she was a public school teacher, and so I remember, being in the back of her classroom, finishing work at the end of the day, and seeing like, why is it that my school building looks one way and her school building looks differently? Or when she was working with kids, right, who are in foster care, as a social worker, and I would be in the back of her car saying, why is it there some kids who are my age have been in 4 or 5 different foster homes in 1 year? And so when I think about the singular kind of social issue that drives the work that I've done and I've been doing for a while, it's been around this question of how can we make sure that zip code and circumstance don't determine young people's outcomes. There's you go to any school at any of our cities and there's great kids everywhere, but there isn't always enough great resources to match the brilliance that's in the students that are there. And so my singular question has been, how can we get the brilliance of our students and young people to be matched by brilliance in schools and brilliance in services and programs that serve them? And that's been something that I've been trying to work on for a while, because the reality is that while there isn't a brilliance gap, there is an opportunity gap. We've got to do a better job of bridging that.
Thank you, Adorian. And I know that being on the Board of Education is part of the way that you hope to bridge that gap. What exactly, though, what power does the Board of Education have? What role does it play? We always talk about education at the federal level, at the state level, and the local level, but sometimes there's confusion about what the different bodies actually do. So what is the Board of Education in charge of in Newark?
Yeah. I'm gonna answer it, but I'd love to hear if people could like drop in the chat when you hear Board of Education. Every city and every township has one. What do you think it does? I'd be curious to hear what people think. You drop that in the chat and I'm gonna answer, and I would like to see if there's any matchup or difference from those thoughts. But essentially the Board of Education has two roles. So one is to be a voice for the community at the decision-making table in education in your town or your city. So there's a group of folks who are elected, right? So I had to run and knock on doors and canvass all this stuff, asking people to vote for me on a platform, right? Similar to how when you guys are like debating, you've got your arguments. I had to position to these, to 30,000 voters in the city of Newark, why they would want to vote for me, to vote for them, to run for them, right? And part of the things that sold them was a platform that would allow people to feel that when my voice was at the table, their voice was at the table. So the first part is being a voice for various members of the community, from students to parents to teachers, and all the diversity that comes with all those groups, so that their voices are heard when decisions are made. The second point is to serve as essentially the kind of advisory space and advisory kind of accountability structure for the superintendent, who is in effect the CEO of a school district, or the principal. If you think about the principal of your school, the superintendent is the principal of your school district. And so as a board member, my job is to evaluate him, give him recommendations on how to better kind of administer his work, and doing that all from a lens that is actually incorporating the voice of the community. Oh, I like Rudra's question. Is it the boss of the schools? Oh, I love that. If you ask me, the boss of the school should be the young people, right? It should be students whose voices and interests and ideas are guiding the decisions that are made at the school. Too often we don't have schools that are designed by like what young people want and what they think. And there needs to be a balance, right? Like no one knows everything. The adults don't know everything. kids don't own everything. But the best schools that I see are ones where like young people have an equal say, or at least a bigger share in what's said at the school. My job isn't to necessarily be the boss of the schools, but I do help oversee what's going on. And when things are looking too crazy, those things come to me. So I love that question.
Thanks, Dorian. And you started talking a little bit about what it was like having to knock on doors, trying to convince tens of thousands of people to vote for you. Can you talk a little bit more about the process of running for office, particularly as a young person? I'm wondering, what was it like for you to have to knock on doors? Did you organize volunteers? How big of a role did fundraising play? A lot of the students study the role of money and politics, and I'm wondering, did that have a role at all, or for you personally?
Yeah, ooh, that's a strong question. So I don't know if anyone on here has been like maybe in student government in your school, or has assumed some kind of like leadership role over a club. Maybe it's debate, maybe it's a sport and you're a captain, or you're in some kind of leadership role. If so, let me know. I'm curious to hear what you guys are like involved in. And if not, that's cool too. But to run and to get people to vote for you, it's kind of a similar process that you would go through to have someone elect you to be a captain, or have somebody to vote for you to be on the, this class president. The difference though is that, it's a government position, right? And so it was really interesting, y'all. I would never forget this. I was really lucky to have a ton of support when I ran by a bunch of people, from amazing folks doing amazing things, and others who just didn't have that privilege. Yeah, I was just basically talking about how, for me, like my executive assistant was like a 16-year-old girl who I mentored, who I taught in my program for the past 5 years, right? And so when it was really a campaign for young people by young people, and one that we wanted to be really engaging, but kind of similar to like if you were running for something at your school, right? Maybe student government, maybe be captain of a team, maybe a president of the debate. I'm not sure what the leadership structure is for you guys. I had to do what y'all would have to do, right? Which is to lobby and get people to say like, okay, why is it that I want to support this person? But the difference is that this was like a government elected position, right? So I had to take an oath. I had to participate in debates, right? With 9 other candidates who were running for my seat. And so it took a lot of work. It took a lot of support. And I think the main thing that it took was knowing your why, right? All of you guys do what you do, be it being active in debate, be it finding a issue that you're passionate about. You do what you do for a reason. And so for me, I knew my reason was really simple. And that was that there should never be someone's zip code or school that determines like where they can go. And I knew so many kids growing up who are just as smart as me, if not smarter, who didn't graduate high school, who didn't end up at a Swarthmore or a college altogether. And not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't have the mentorship or the guidance or the schools that will prepare them and help them get to that place. And so for me, I ran on that. That was my why. And that resonated with people. And I'll never forget, I was able to get, again, a ton of support from friends in high school and college to folks I just knew who grown up in the community. But then there was also some people who weren't as supportive, right? And there were some people who were like, this girl is way too young. What is she gonna do to tell us that she doesn't even have kids? How is she gonna not have kids? And then people, I'm like, wait, so you gotta have kids to have an idea on what kids need to be successful? Like, what? First of all, I was in high school more recent than you, and not like that's an issue, right? You can be 75 and be an amazing advocate for kids, but that's also not fair to say that just because you're 23, you can't be one. And so, in whatever you do, you'll have naysayers. You'll have people who say, no, you can't do this, or you're too this for that, or you're not qualified. But you have to know your why, and you have to hustle and get it done. And I'm glad that I didn't listen to any of those people, because now I'm here.
And Jonathan in the chat said that your assistant being a 16-year-old is a really good story. Do you think having that many youth participating in your campaign helped give excitement around your campaign? Because the stereotype is that young people don't care about politics, that they don't vote, that they're disillusioned with the process. But it seems like your campaign was fueled by that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, half of my volunteers were little boys and girls from the city of Newark, middle school, high school, phone banking, knocking on doors, going with me to bus stops. He said, telling people to vote, trying to get folks to vote for the first time. I remember being in this one particular neighborhood of the city. So when you run for any elected position, right? You're given kind of a breakdown of who the voters are in the community. And so there was like this set of blocks from this particular ward of Newark. And there were these 4 blocks. They're like, all right, make sure you go and knock on these doors because these people voted in the last school board election. Funny enough, the school board election in most cities typically only gets single digit turnouts. In Newark, it's less than 4% of people who actually come out and vote. But yet you're talking about $1 billion budget, the largest school district in the state, and not that many people come out, right? So it's a challenge. We've got a lot of work to do to get people to get engaged in this vote. And you guys as young people helping spread the word about how important it is, education is, it becomes really important because when we hear students say, y'all, I'm a young person and I think I have an idea of what I want my schools to look like. I need you to listen to me. That resonates with people. So you guys voting when you become 18, not just in the presidential elections, but at your school board elections become really important. Telling your parents and families to vote in these elections become really important because tax money, all these things go to it. But really quickly, back to the story. There's these 4 blocks, right? And they're saying, make sure you knock on these doors because this is where people voted last year. They're like, with these other 4 blocks, I don't know if you need to go there because these people didn't vote. But me being me, I'm like, no, this is an important election. I want to go and get everybody who I see on this block to vote. And so I go to this particular block and I'm talking to these young brothers. And this young boy tells me, I'll never forget, he had to be like a year or 2 younger than me. I said, look, man, I'm running for office. These are 3 things I care about: curriculum, culture, career readiness. You know, I'm doing my platform. And he's like, sis, I would vote for you, but I can't because I have a criminal record. In the state of New Jersey, they don't allow felons to vote, right? And this was in 2019. At that time, it was absolutely true. The state of New Jersey did not allow people with a criminal record to vote. Luckily, just a few months ago, we passed a new piece of legislation that is reinstating the right to vote for all of these folks. But when you do this work, right, you start to see these things that are normal that are wrong. I would love to hear from you guys, even if you just dropped it in the chat. What's something that a social issue that you didn't really know about as much until you had to debate it? And then you were like, what? This is the norm for people? There are some people who have to live through this under these conditions. And so there are so many ways in which when we just chase our why, we actually end up finding out that there's a lot of other things that are wrong. And I have something to say about it. And there's something I can do about it. And that's my charge to you guys. Focus on your why and think about what you can do about it.
Thanks, Adorian. And so one topic that came up is Black Lives Matter, something that Rudra didn't know about until he had to debate it. I know that you've had girls debating defunding the police. So I know that's a topic that your girls were recently engaging with. I'm wondering if anyone else would like to share what are some topics that have come up for them that they didn't know anything about until it was time to debate it. And I know for me, even as a debate teacher, there was a topic in Lincoln Douglas this past season on the use of artificial intelligence within the police department, or predictive algorithms, right? So predictive policing. And that was something that I didn't really know when it was until it was time to get ready for a tournament. And then funnily enough, one of the professors who was one of the architects for that technology was right down the street from my school at UCLA. And so I think it is fascinating the way debate forces us to consider issues that otherwise we would have never maybe encountered just in our regular daily lives. Dorian, you mentioned a really interesting barrier to participation, that of people being disenfranchised, being stripped of the right to vote. Coach Breyer in the chat was wondering about some of the barriers for you in terms of running for office. What were some of the actual costs and procedures in running for office? Because I've heard that there's a lot of rules and regulations that sometimes people even hire attorneys for, or that they have someone to organize that for them because it's so complex that it's a barrier to entry in and of itself. I know that it was last year, but do you remember some of the costs or some of those different procedures that you had to encounter?
Yeah. So one of the reasons, I'll tell you guys this quickly. I was actually, when I first graduated college, I graduated 2016. I think I was 21 when I graduated. Following year, I was 22, doing like some grassroots work in the community with students who were opportunity youth, right? Who had dropped out and whatnot, and wanted to get back in school. I was approached then to run for office by a group of people. And I just said, I don't think so. Like, I don't think I'm ready right now. I'm focusing on some other things. I'm not sure this is what I want to do. A year later, the mayor of Newark, Mayor Ross Baraka, who was the son of a poet and activist, Amiri Baraka, came to me and said, Adorian, I've been seeing what you do in the community. I've been seeing how you engage with young people. In fact, I started taking some of my students to his leadership academy, and he noticed me there. And he was like, I would love for you to run as a candidate that I support and endorse. And I was like, oh, really? And I said, yeah. First, I said, can I take a day to think about it? And then I said, yeah. And so why do I tell that? What was really interesting about that, and this is for all of you guys, when you keep chasing your why and like your purpose and whatever it is that you're doing, you'll realize that like the opportunities that you want, they'll chase you. You won't have to chase them. I never was looking to run for office per se, but that opportunity came up by virtue of me doing my work. In doing that, one of the benefits of being supported by the mayor was that it came with like this other set of infrastructure of supports. So me trying to figure out, I had to get a campaign treasurer. I had to do, obviously, raise funds. I think my minimum, because I ran on a team, and so for each team member was, the ideal was to raise about 5,000. But I was like, I want to try to outraise that. So I actually raised about 10,000. We had to have like a ton of other regulations, like some of which I wasn't completely aware of. But yeah, like because I had that support, I was able to like know how to navigate these things that were really tricky when you're first running for office that you don't always know. So yeah, there was a lot of mixing cranes. I'd say on the fundraising thing, one of your best resources is just like the people who you have in your midst. I think a lot of times we call it like a network, and I think I love that word, but I also hate it because sometimes networking can sound like so transactional. But there's something to be said about having a group of people with real relationships that you're able to cultivate over the years that are like authentic relationships. And guess what? When you look at this chat of folks here in this Zoom meeting, when you look at the people who you're debating with and against, right, at your tournaments, those people are part of your network. When I was in high school, I did parliamentary debate and I did Mino UN. I'll never forget, I was in the Czech Republic in like 10th grade, and there are people I met who I was opposed. Like, I think they were Egypt and I was like Turkey, who I'm still in touch with today, right? So your network becomes really important. And so when I was raising money, and again, like $5,000, $10,000 for the most part is like a relatively small amount in the aggregate, but a lot of that money just came from me making Facebook posts and Instagram posts, and folks from Swarthmore, from high school, from Model UN, right? Or all these different spaces that I've been a part of, made those donations. So I hope that answers the question a little bit about like some of the nooks and crannies. Also, I think you said that Jonathan Alson is on here, from Justice Children Choir. Jonathan, you don't know how much I like love and admire you. When I was at SWAT and when I was a research assistant for the Ed Psych Lab, I got to work with some of your students from Chester's Children's Choir for Science for Kids, and I just like fell in love with the work, fell in love with everything you do. So just know you've got a big fan here, and like I'm really happy to be in your virtual space.
And I'm just looking at the chat. I'm getting some private messages. I'm also looking at the public messages. And one thing that Arishka said, I think you answered that question of what motivated you to run for office. I'm really struck by the idea, Dorian, that you were approached to run for office, because from what I've read, that's common also among women, that a lot of women do not run for office until they're asked to more than once, and that it tends to be the gentlemen in spaces who see an open position and say, yes, that's me. And so I think that's something that we can all maybe digest and reflect on, this idea of, you know, do we want to wait to be asked? I think one thing that was great about it is that means you had real support. It wasn't coming from a place of ego or a place of what you wanted for yourself in terms of your career or your ladder, but it was really the community choosing you and saying, we need you to help us move forward in that way. So I think that's something really special. And also something just to think about with, you know, women and running for office. Arishka had a comment in the chat. Let me scroll back to it. There's so much here. I have to scroll. Oh, Anya in the chat said, what were some of the other reasons that people couldn't vote that you found out about besides having a criminal record? So were there other barriers to voters voting besides their criminal record?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I would say one of the biggest barriers, Anya, is just everyone doesn't necessarily see voting as something that can benefit them. There are so many ways in which the systems in this country, be it from the criminal justice system to the political system, right? Education system, depending on the schools you go to, there are so many different ways in which the system will make you believe that it doesn't work for everybody. And so I had a ton of conversations with folks who were like, well, what is this actually going to do? Is this going to help me? Is this really going to work? If I really vote for you, like, will this actually really change something? And that's a real concern. And so I think it's a lack of faith and a lack of trust that folks have developed with the electoral process, because a lot of times the electoral process hasn't worked for everybody. Be it from redlining. I mean, there's so many ways in which like structural issues have gotten in the way. So I'd say the biggest thing, Ian, was really just like people not always feeling that if they voted, that it would make a difference. That was the biggest thing. I think the other thing, and I don't know if you guys have talked about elections at all in your debates, but just like the timing of debates, right? I mean, of elections can be really tricky. So the fact that we do elections on Tuesdays during the day, I think polls on average close at 8, but when a lot of people have to work and it's during a work week. If I'm a single parent, or even if I'm a parent of a 2-parent household and I got to work a 9 to 5, and I got a part-time job after, and I don't have childcare, practically, physically going to the voting bowl is like really difficult. And so there's a lot of other ways too. And again, it's in the middle of the week, right? And if I got to work and I don't have that support, there are a lot of ways in which like the voting system as it is isn't necessarily convenient for all Americans. And so that was a barrier. That was a barrier too. I'm not sure what you and some of your other peers think, but I talk to a lot of young people, right? And students who feel like a bit of a mix. Like some of them feel like if they vote, let's say if they could vote in the 2020 presidential election, some of them feel like it will make a difference, others don't. And so I think that some of the sentiments that I experienced canvassing the streets of Newark, knocking on doors, my hometown I was born and raised in, last year, in terms from adults and other people who felt disenchanted, I think some young people today would say the same about the electoral process too. We have to do a better job of creating a system that folks knows works for everybody, and not just those who are most privileged in different ways.
Thanks, Adorian. And I just want to raise up a comment that Anya made in the chat. And she said, I didn't know about how the Electoral College worked, especially on the national level, until I had to research it for debate. And I believe I was reading, well, I can't remember what I was reading, but there was something that I encountered where most people don't actually understand how the Electoral College works. And so it seems to be this system that people feel like they're not educated on, they don't understand how it works, and they feel like it's not something that they should be active in and a part of. There's another question that I want to highlight from Arishka, and she said, what do you think would help schools educate their students about social justice?
Hmm. The most powerful voice we have in making changes in schools comes from the young people voicing it themselves. I cannot stress to you enough, especially in this moment that we're in as a country, where schools and organizations and companies, I'm sure you guys are on Instagram, and y'all may be just as tired as I am as seeing every brand saying all voices matter and Black Lives Matter. And again, I'm here for it. I think that's important. But like, are y'all just realizing that it's important to highlight Black and brown and LGBTQIA and Latinx and indigenous voices? Like, are we really just realizing that? We should have realized this a long time ago. But part of the push that's forcing these companies and organizations, and we tie back to schools, to have these conversations is because young people are saying, I've had enough and I need you to get it together. And so when we think about what we can do to help schools better educate students around social justice, we need you guys as young people who are not just our tomorrow, but who are our right now, to demand more from your schools. We need you to organize and write petitions and set up meetings with your deans and your principals and your, academic heads at your schools, saying, look, this is the material that we want to learn. This is why it's important. And this is why it's actually beneficial. There is data and research that shows that when we are seventh and eighth and ninth and 10th and 11th grade learning about social issues, that we become better critical thinkers, right? And when you are a better critical thinker, you're more likely to get a different level of achievement in the workforce, right? Like, the data just shows that when you're able to think and work on these issues from an early age, it actually benefits you in the long term. We need you guys to demand this from your school, be it at school board meetings, be it at student town halls. Your voice is the most important one. Every month at our school board meetings, we get tons of folks from the community who come out and speak, right? And it's great because we need to hear that. The voices that always stand out the most are those of the students, period. When the young people come to the mic, we stop everything we're doing. Like, we need to hear from you. And so you use your voice because it matters. And it's what we need to hold adults accountable. We can all think about a time when we were more right than an adult and the adult won, right? That's real. Adults are not always right, and that's okay. You as young people are not the problem, you're the solution. So we need to hear your voice, and that's how we'll get this change.
Thank you, Adorian. So I'm looking at the chat, a couple more questions coming in. Coach Breyer asked, what are some of the systemic barriers within the educational system that you have found or that you've discovered or that you've experienced that maybe other people aren't even aware of? At this point, we're bi-coastal. Some of us are in charter schools, public schools, private schools, wealthy districts, lower income districts. We're all coming from a wide variety of experiences. What systematic barriers are you aware of within the educational system that maybe some of us in the audience aren't?
That's really a layered question that I hope I can do justice. I think,
and I'll put it in the chat as well, because I know that was a lot.
Yeah. Some of the systemic barriers in the educational system we found that others might not know about. I would say, honestly, education, right? It's a public system. And so public systems have a responsibility to serve everybody. In an ideal world, serve them justice and serve them with fidelity. The reality is that public systems are also vulnerable to the public problems and the structural problems that affect the community at large. In fact, they're more vulnerable to be affected by these issues because it's kind of hyper concentrated in this context, especially when you're talking about dealing with educating thousands of pupils, right? Thousands of young people. And so the short answer to this question is that all the things that are wrong in our greater society, from classism to racism to sexism, if we think that it exists on a regular day-to-day basis, right? If you, as a person of color or a woman or anyone who sits at the margins of any identity, if you have to experience microaggressions in your day-to-day life, imagine what that ripple effects looks like in an entire school system serving tens and thousands of kids. It's big, it's deep, it's messy, and it's hard to put your finger on because it's not always as easy as like, oh my God, someone called somebody a derogatory word. But sometimes it's as complicated as, well, why do all kids who go to a certain level of performing school only live in one area, or all belong to a certain racial or social economic group, right? It looks differently, and sometimes it's more difficult to pinpoint. So yeah, I think these structural issues that we know exist are amplified. They're amplified even more in a system like education that is so complicated, and that is so precious because it's dealing with our country's most precious jewel, which is our young people. And often our young people, as precious and as brilliant and as talented as you are, we don't always do a great job in these systems as at protecting that brilliance and protecting those gifts. And it makes things really tricky.
Dorian, I really appreciate your answer, because what you're getting at is that it's not that education is the problem that we need to solve. What it sounds like you're saying is that education is reflecting all of the issues in society that we all know to exist, that play out in this way, where whether it's students not having access to nutritious food, whether it's students not having access to transportation, not having access to safe housing, all of these different things are impacting us. I know one thing that we're all in this space right now are thinking about is going back to school. And again, we're bi-coastal, we're all in different cities, our districts, our private schools, charter schools all have different plans for whether we're going back in person or remote learning.
Yeah.
What is the plan currently for students in Newark, and to what extent did the Board of Education have a role in that plan?
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely want to get into that. One thing that you really made me think of on like the systemic issues, and I think when Arishka asked something connected to Coach Breyer's question about how can people empower or just change in said systemic barriers. I think back to like when I first really became aware of like how jacked up the world can really be. And I was 16. And at the time I was originally I had went to a small charter school in Newark, a predominantly Black and Latino or Latinx charter school. And then for high school, ended up getting a scholarship to go to this really fancy prep school in Western Massachusetts. And so I go there, and like overall, like I really loved it, right? Like had a really great experience. But I vividly remember being, I think this was like my senior year, getting ready to apply to colleges. I just come home back to New Jersey, and I was talking to a guy actually that I was dating at the time. And I was like, yo, I'm so stressed right now. So I've got to get ready for my SATs. I'm so sick of taking all this test prep my school has me doing. And he goes, well, what's the SAT? I was like, what? He's like, what is that? Now, mind you, we were in the same grade, the same age, from the same town. And he like literally, he didn't even know what the SAT was. And it was at that moment I was like, okay, something is wrong. So I literally that summer, I texted a couple of my friends from my network, right? Like, again, you guys are each other's network. These people who I texted actually were people who were in the same program that was taking kids from Newark to go to these different boarding schools. And I was like, y'all, we've got to do something about the fact that like a lot of kids, not every kid, because again, I knew a bunch of kids who were going to schools in Newark who knew what the SAT was, but there were a ton of kids who didn't. I was like, a bunch of kids don't know what the SAT is. We need to do something about it. And I was like, what if we just taught kids about how to prep for the SAT, but do it in a way that was fun? And so we got together, we came up with like this fun way to teach the SAT. We ran that program for free for over 3 summers, worked with kids from over 15 different schools, right? So when you ask this question of how can people address change said systemic barriers, you are in power whether you have an elected position or not, right? Like, I was 16, about to turn 17. At the time, some of the students that I was teaching were older than me. So you have to be willing to use what's in your hand, regardless of what your position is as a student, as a whatever, to do something about a problem that you see. And I can't say that I would be here right now as an elected school board member if I didn't do something about the problems that I noticed at 16, right? So start today with what you have. To the question about what the plan is for reopening. And so we actually have a board meeting tomorrow where we'll be announcing and going over the reopening plan. But essentially, it's a model that would allow both our parents and our districts, but mainly like our parents and our students, to have some flexibility. We know that we can't be Georgia right now, where all students are literally in-person instruction. And right now, there's been over 100 reported cases of COVID within the staff. Right? Like, we can't be Georgia. One of my good friends is on the school board in Gwinnett County, which is the largest district in Georgia right now. And he was the lone voice 2 weeks ago who voted against that plan. And whatever you want to do, especially when you're asking this question of how can I tackle systemic issues? How can I find my why, find something I'm passionate about? You've got to be willing to stand alone. You got to be willing to be the only one sometimes saying what you got to say, doing what you have to do. And so we know we can't be Georgia, right? So we're creating a plan where parents who want to send their kids to school are able to do that on a limited basis, right? There'll be certain days of the week where schools for in-person instruction will be open, but then also parents who want to teach virtual, who want their kid to be home for virtual instruction will have that option as well. Something that'll meet the students halfway. And, you know, we're going to try it out and see what works. I don't think there is anything such thing as a perfect plan. No district knows exactly what to do because these are unprecedented times. But we do know that when we put the voices of parents and students at the helm, then we're doing something right. And so we've really been listening to what students and parents have to say and trying to use that as our guide and come up with an approach that's a bit balanced.
Thank you, Adorian, for sharing that story, especially about you being a teenager and identifying a problem, texting your friends, your cohort, your network at the time, which was other teenagers, and saying,
Right.
what are we going to do about this problem? And I think hopefully that's going to be a nugget that resonates with all of these students. What is a problem that you're identifying in your school or in your community or your place of worship, wherever it is that you find community, and get your friends together and figure it out, scheme together. What is it that you're going to do to address these problems? I love that story, especially because of how young you were, and really it's a story of organizing as a teenager, which is exciting.
For sure. I'm thinking about the protests, one of the biggest George Floyd protests a couple weeks ago in Nashville was organized by 16 and 17-year-olds over Instagram, period. Like, they were like, we need to do something about this, and let's make it happen. Literally just last week, I was on 2 panels with some students who are you guys' age, and they're texting me right now. Actually, I'm telling them, I'm like, y'all, I'm working on some reopening plans for the district, so I'm a little bit bombarded right now, but let me get back to you guys Saturday, because they all go to these independent schools that have a lot of issues, right? And they're texting me right now because they want me to help them come up with a framework for how they can approach their dean or the head of school about how to have more socially justice-oriented classes, or how to have more diverse teaching staff, or how to have policies to help teachers and students know how to navigate microaggressions when they happen. And so you're absolutely right. It starts with what's in your hand. We can do something about it. We've just got to be willing to ask the question, to make the demand, and willing to stand alone sometimes to work on what we care about.
Thanks, Adorian. And I'm realizing we have less than 10 minutes left. I want to take a pause. I have a million questions. I could keep you up until midnight if you let me. I'm going to take a pause and just look to the chat, or if anyone wants to raise their hand to ask a question, or if they would like to make a comment. I'm also wondering if everyone on this call knows what the SAT is, because we have some middle schoolers, Rudra, some of the high schoolers. Do you all know what the SAT is?
Yeah.
What is the SAT?
I think the SAT is like this test you have to take to get into college, I believe.
That's
Yeah.
exactly it. And so you know exactly what the SAT is as a middle school student. And I'm just processing, Adorian, what you said about encountering someone your age when you were a junior in high school who did not know what the SAT is. And we have middle schoolers who know what it is. And so, I mean, I think that says a lot about that discrepancy.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is like a smart kid, right? Like he's a star athlete at his high school, a good kid, but didn't have access to this basic information. And that's a problem, right? That's a problem. And again, like I, I never take away the responsibility that young people and we as teens and young people have for our own decisions. But to me, like that's an adult problem. Like you're around too many adults at 17 to not be somebody in your school or your home failed you. And that's a problem. And we as adults got to do a better job of not failing our kids. And you guys, as the young people, y'all have to hold us accountable. So like some of the questions in this chat earlier about like, how do we do more social justice in our schools? Like, we've got to hear from you. You guys got to hold us adults accountable because we don't know all the answers. And again, you young people are never the problem. You're always the solution.
I'm looking at a question that just appeared in the chat. You debated in Parley, you were in mock trial, so you have that experience similar to the students. And the question here in the chat is there a real world policy that is not being widely adopted that you think school boards across the US should be adopting? That's a big question. I'm going to read it again because now I'm trying to think, what are my ideas? And all of you and the audience should be thinking about if you have ideas as well. So the question again is, as a former Parley debater yourself, you are of course very familiar with our use of plans and policies, right? In parliamentary debate, we're advocating for a specific plan. We have our plan text ready. This is what we hope we will be able to do that the judge will vote on, right? Is there a real world policy that is not being widely adopted that you think school boards across the USA should be adopting? Thanks again. End quote.
I love that question. Oh my goodness. That's really fun to answer because I know what thing that I would change if I could. And again, I need you all's help as young people to get this done. But I think that every school and every school district should be required to teach civics, and not just traditional civics and who are my elected officials and what is X, Y, and Z, but a civics curriculum that's embedded with social justice. I'm embedded with a social action strand, right? So currently, I believe there's only around 11 states that mandate a civics curriculum, right? So that mandate that young people learn in their schools about the legislative process and how to vote, how to come up with a bill, and how to come up with a policy. A lot of these things that you guys, skills that you get to hone being in parliamentary debate, communication skills, analyzing social justice issues, that's not necessarily common. And in fact, a number of states, New Jersey included, don't even require that young people are getting these types of experiences. And so my one thing would be, I think that all students have a right to not only learn how government works, but learn the tools and strategies on how to make government better for people. And doing that through courses that require that we as students get to wrestle with and discuss issues of social justice, issues of identity, all these things that are critical to who we are as human beings and as democratic citizens. That should be required. And I'm doing some work right now in Newark on something that's somewhat related to this, but not explicitly civics, which is called the Amistad curriculum. The Amistad Act is actually a piece of legislation that's been on the books in the state of New Jersey since 2002. And what it does is it mandates that all students across the state of New Jersey are taught U.S. history, but U.S. history inclusive of African American history and other marginalized identities who have shaped U.S. history just as much as any other group. We've had that legislation on the books for almost 20 years, but the challenge has been implementation and consistent implementation. And so Newark has some level of strong implementation, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so we're doing a lot of work in Newark Public Schools on doing a better job at implementing that work. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Adorian. And I know the Parley debaters know that there's a difference between having your plan and having a law and not having enforcement, right? That's a gap
right.
that we see in the real world that we deal with in Round, right? There's one, Arishka. Arishka has another question. She said, this might have been answered, but how can we as students educate others about social justice? I love that question.
Yeah, I love that. So Jonathan, let me see, he wrote in the chat about like all the different like advocacy skills, right, that come from doing debate, from teaching students how to propose, defend, and attack advocacies for change, right? All of this stuff is embedded in the work that you guys are doing every week as debaters and parliamentary. So y'all have more skills, and Akuna, you can attest to this, and all the adults can attest to this. You guys have more skills in some of these areas than adults 2 or 3 times their age do. And that's no lie. And so use those skills to find different ways to engage your peers. Arishka, right? Like, you probably could tell me what are the 3 quickest ways that I could try to get in touch with or like get the attention of someone in your age. And you'll probably say social media, right? And if I ask you what kind of social media, I'm guessing that Instagram, TikTok, and maybe one other thing will pop up, right? If we're thinking about like certain immediate ways that we can educate others, particularly like our peers on these things that matter, what are some ways in which we can use the things that young people and folks in your age group access the most to convey this information? We have to ask y'all that. Y'all know the answers. And so, yes, it really comes down to you as young people saying, 1, what is it that I care about? 2, what do I want to do about this issue I care about? And 3, what is the best way I can go about engaging and educating folks on this issue that matters to me? Because chances are it matters to somebody else too. We just got to find creative ways to engage them and get them to figure it out. But again, like using what's in your hand, right? So be it your phone and the different tools that you have from your social media platforms to your network and the people you have who debate with you, who you debate against. Y'all are all a family. You imagine if this is a national organization, right? That you guys are part of with this association. Imagine if all these debate groups from across the country, let's say, forget the country, what if we just stuck with California alone, right? Y'all could be a whole country if y'all wanted to. Y'all are so big. If all of the debate groups and associations in California alone got together with like a 5-point plan of the 3 or 4 issues that we want to better educate our peers on, you guys would be a powerhouse. It would be a powerhouse. And so think about the ways that you can organize start with your school, right? Start small within your school group, and then think how you can build to reach more people in ways that really engage folks.
Thank you, Adorian. I have 2,000 more questions, but I am going to respect your time because I appreciate that you're on the East Coast and that you're willing to log in at this hour. I know you had a long day as well. I want to thank you so much for engaging our debaters. If we had a part 2, what I would love to hear about is how your students have acted as advocates, both at the national level and the local level in terms of legislation. But I'll just leave it as a nugget that Ms. Adorian's students, through her nonprofit, She Wins, engage in that work, and we can reflect on, well, what can we do? Because you've made it very clear, the skills are already in the room. It's a matter of deciding what issues do we care about that we want to attend to. So again, I thank you so much for your time. Thank you for engaging our debaters, and have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, guys. See y'all later.
Thank you.
Thanks a ton for joining us, Adorian.